He built an empire worth billions, yet died alone on a rooftop, hunted like a wild animal. What transforms a poor street kid into the most feared drug lord in history? This is not just a story about drugs. It is about a man who ruled a country through terror, charisma, and blood, before he became a global symbol of fear and violence. Pablo Escobar was just another face in the slums of Medellin, Colombia. Born into poverty, he wasn't handed power. He clawed it from the dirt, stone by stone. From a young age, Escobar understood something few others did. Power didn't come from wealth or status. It came from fear and the willingness to do what others wouldn't. He didn't just want money. He wanted to be remembered, worshipped, untouchable. His first ventures weren't glamorous. He started small, stealing tombstones, scrubbing off the names, and reselling them to black market buyers. Then came car theft, and a few years later, smuggling electronics and cigarettes. Each crime taught him a lesson, but none satisfied his hunger. He was ambitious, cunning, and utterly without remorse. When cocaine emerged as the drug of choice among the American elite, Escobar saw his window. It wasn't just a business opportunity. It was the gateway to absolute control. He didn't invent cocaine, but he industrialized it. With military precision, he coordinated coca farms in the Andes, processing labs deep in the jungle, and trafficking routes that snaked through every possible gap in border security. Planes, submarines, mules, it didn't matter. If it could carry a kilo, it was part of his operation. Within a few years, Escobar's Medellin cartel was shipping tons of cocaine into the United States every week. The profits were unimaginable. At the height of his empire, he was reportedly making $420 million a week. But Escobar didn't just hoard wealth, he weaponized it. He learned early on that bullets only silence people, but money controls them. He coined a policy that would become his trademark: plata o plomo, silver or lead, a bribe or a bullet. Most chose silver. Judges, police chiefs, customs officials, even politicians, they all had a price, and Escobar was more than willing to pay it. For those who didn't, death came swiftly. In the early 1980s, the streets of Colombia ran red. Bodies appeared in alleys, car bombs tore through city centers, and entire families vanished without a trace. Fear wasn't a byproduct of his rule, it was his strategy. But Escobar wasn't just a thug in a jungle. He knew the power of image. In the barrios, where the government had failed for decades, Escobar stepped in. He built housing, schools, clinics, soccer fields, and the people adored him for it. To the poor, he wasn't a criminal, he was a savior. Children wore his face on t-shirts. Mothers blessed him for giving them running water. He wrapped his violence in charity, and the lines between monster and messiah began to blur. His ambitions stretched beyond the drug trade. Escobar had political dreams. In 1982, he was elected as an alternate member of Colombia's Congress, a move that horrified the nation's elite. Here was a man they all knew was a murderer, a trafficker, and a terrorist, now walking the halls of power with immunity. His wealth bought him influence, but his presence in government made him a legitimate threat to the state. Investigations followed. A brave few, including Minister of Justice Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, spoke out. Escobar responded the only way he knew how. Lara Bonilla was gunned down in 1984, his car sprayed with bullets in the capital's streets. The message was clear: oppose Escobar, and you don't just die, you die publicly. That murder shattered Escobar's brief political career, but by then, it didn't matter. He had already grown too powerful to stop. The government declared war, but Escobar had his own army, hundreds of men willing to die for him, not because they believed in him, but because they feared what would happen if they didn't. He turned Medellin into his fortress. From the moment he woke to the moment he slept, he was surrounded by guns, cash, and silence. No one spoke against him. No one dared. Yet, beneath the empire of wealth and blood, Escobar was changing. Power had made him paranoid. He trusted no one. He tested his own men by feeding them false rumors, waiting to see if the secrets leaked. When they did, the response was brutal. He killed not just the traitor, but their entire family. He was sending a message, not just to his enemies, but to everyone inside his world. Loyalty is not an option. It is a requirement. The rise of Pablo Escobar wasn't accidental. It was methodical, ruthless, and cold. Every step was calculated. Every murder had a purpose. Every deal was a piece of a much larger puzzle. a puzzle that would eventually swallow him whole. But in those early years, Escobar was untouchable. The world watched in horror and awe as a man from nothing became one of the richest, most feared figures in human history. What they didn't see, not yet, was how quickly empires built on blood begin to rot from within. By the mid to late 1980s, Pablo Escobar was no longer just a drug lord. He was a shadow government. His word carried more weight than Colombia's president in entire regions of the country. His empire had no borders, and his power didn't end at Colombia's edges. It extended into Miami, Mexico, Panama, and across the Atlantic. Cocaine was no longer a street drug. It was a global phenomenon, and Escobar was its king. But this was not the power of diplomacy or law. It was the power of terror. In every corner of his operation, violence was the foundation. Escobar ruled with a code of silence enforced through brutality. If a pilot made a mistake during a drop, he disappeared. If a sicario failed an assassination, he was buried alongside the target. Escobar didn't tolerate weakness. And while the outside world saw him living in palatial estates with exotic animals and private airstrips, those closest to him knew they were walking on a tightrope suspended above a pit of snakes. One wrong word, one nervous glance, and your life was over. Colombia was under siege, not by a foreign enemy, but by one of its own. Judges were assassinated in broad daylight. Presidential candidates were blown up mid-campaign. Planes full of civilians were bombed because Escobar believed one man might be on board. It wasn't just revenge, it was spectacle. He didn't want people to forget who he was. Every explosion, every bullet-riddled body dumped in a gutter was a message: I decide who lives. At the height of his empire, Escobar's Medellin cartel was smuggling over 15 tons of cocaine into the U.S. each day. His network stretched from jungle labs to American nightclubs. Customs officials, military officers, and local police were either bought or killed. There was no third option. In Miami, violence surged as rival cartels tried to compete, but Escobar always stayed one step ahead, funding paramilitaries, bribing politicians, and destabilizing entire institutions. The chaos he sowed was not random. It was calculated, and it served him well. The Colombian government, backed by mounting U.S. pressure, tried to strike back. But for every raid, there was a leak. For every arrest, there was a judge who would dismiss charges. The justice system was so compromised that even when Escobar was caught red-handed, nothing stuck. His money had eroded the law itself. Eventually, Colombia passed an extradition treaty with the United States, a move Escobar viewed as a direct threat. Being tried on American soil meant losing everything: his control, his comfort, and perhaps his life. So, he made it his mission to end extradition. To enforce his demand, Escobar unleashed a reign of terror unlike anything the country had ever seen. Bombings ripped through government buildings. Entire police departments were hunted. The capital city became a war zone. Civilians became collateral damage. Schools closed. Hospitals overflowed. People lived in constant fear, not of war, but of one man and the empire he had built. And still, through all of it, Escobar claimed he was fighting for justice, that he was defending Colombia's sovereignty. In reality, he was defending his throne. Then came one of the most surreal chapters in the story of Escobar, La Catedral. When cornered by authorities and facing mounting pressure from the U.S., Escobar offered a deal. He would surrender, on one condition: he would design and build his own prison. The Colombian government, desperate and broken, agreed. La Catedral wasn't a prison. It was a luxury resort, complete with jacuzzis, satellite TVs, a nightclub, and a waterfall. Escobar even selected the guards himself. From this mountaintop fortress, he continued to run his empire, untouched, untouchable. But absolute power comes with a cost. The higher Escobar climbed, the more unstable the ground beneath him became. His own men began to question his decisions. Some were uncomfortable with how openly he flaunted his power. Others were simply tired of the bloodshed. And as the money grew, so did the greed. His trusted lieutenants began hiding profits, forming side alliances, even contemplating betrayals. Escobar, ever paranoid, responded with swift and merciless purges. Men he had known for decades were dragged out and executed. Families were shattered overnight. The air within his inner circle grew thick with suspicion and fear. Outside the walls of La Catedral, the tide was turning. A new generation of traffickers, more pragmatic, less emotional, began aligning against him. Rivals from the Cali cartel, intelligence officers, and American agencies began forming a loose alliance, driven by one goal: dismantle Escobar's grip. The cost was high, but the momentum had shifted. Escobar had made himself the enemy of too many people, burned too many bridges, and trusted no one. He had become a man surrounded by ghosts, even while still alive. His empire, once built on loyalty, was crumbling under the weight of betrayal. And for the first time, Pablo Escobar was no longer hunting. He was being hunted. The end didn't come suddenly. It came like a slow bleed, quiet at first, then uncontrollable. By the early 1990s, the man who once ruled over Colombia with fear and fire was now a ghost, slipping through shadows, losing everything he had built piece by piece. Pablo Escobar, once invincible, had become the most wanted man in the world. His enemies weren't just governments anymore. They were former allies, betrayed lieutenants, and a secret network of vengeance hell-bent on erasing his legacy from the earth. Among the most dangerous of these enemies was a group known only by a whisper: Los Pepes, perseguidos por Pablo Escobar. People persecuted by Pablo Escobar. It was more than a death squad. It was a coalition of rage, built from the bones of Escobar's victims, relatives, rivals, ex-associates, and rogue operatives from Colombian intelligence agencies. They had one mission: destroy everything Escobar loved. And they were funded and supported, quietly, by the very people sworn to uphold the law. His safe houses began to disappear. His money stashes were raided or burned. One by one, his trusted allies were assassinated, their bodies left as warnings. His family, once shielded in luxury and privacy, became targets. Bombs exploded near his wife and children. His own son later described how they would move from house to house in the dead of night, hiding in sewers and basements, terrified that every sound was a death sentence. For the first time in his life, Escobar couldn't buy safety. There was no bribe big enough, no bullet fast enough. The net was tightening. American intelligence had introduced a new weapon into the hunt: electronic surveillance. They began intercepting his radio transmissions, tracing his calls, narrowing down his movements. Escobar, once the master of control, became erratic. He stopped trusting even his most loyal sicarios. He moved constantly, sleeping in low-rent apartments, always barefoot, always armed. He dyed his mustache. He traveled alone. His world had shrunk to the size of a prison cell. Only this time, he hadn't built it. And then came December 2nd, 1993. A phone call, brief, panicked, and traced. Somewhere in Medellin, Escobar had contacted his son. He missed him. He wanted to hear his voice. He knew it was dangerous, but he called anyway. The signal bounced across the city and was intercepted by a Colombian Special Forces unit trained by U.S. agents. A location was locked. An address. A two-story house in a modest neighborhood. The end was in sight. What happened next remains the subject of myth, memory, and controversy. According to official reports, a tactical team stormed the building. Escobar, armed with 2 pistols and a .38 revolver, tried to escape across the rooftop. Shots rang out. A bullet tore through his leg, another into his torso, then a final shot to the head behind the ear. He collapsed onto the red tiles, his lifeless body sprawled under the open sky, face in the blood. Just like that, the most feared man in Colombia was dead, or so the story goes. Others claim he took his own life, that he long sworn he would never be captured alive. His family insists he died by his own hand. The bullet behind the ear, they argue, was self-inflicted. But to many, it didn't matter. The king was gone. The rooftop where he died became an altar. Crowds swarmed the scene. Some cheered. Some wept. Most simply watched in silence, unsure of what the world would look like without him in it. Escobar's death did not bring peace. It brought power vacuums. Violence continued. The drug trade shifted hands. New cartels rose, smarter, quieter, more corporate. But none would ever command the attention or terror that Escobar did. His empire died with him, but his legend survived. For Colombia, his fall was both a relief and a tragedy. A relief because the bloodshed had reached unbearable levels. A tragedy because Escobar was a reflection of something deeper, a broken system where poverty, corruption, and inequality had allowed a man like him to rise in the first place. He hadn't just exploited the cracks in society. He had widened them, filled them with cocaine and cash, and made the world watch. In the years after his death, documentaries, films, and books would immortalize him. Some called him a villain, others a genius. But those who lived through his reign knew the truth was far more complicated. Escobar wasn't a character in a story. He was a storm that tore through a nation, leaving behind scars that would never fully heal. And in the end, for all the billions he earned, for all the power he wielded, he died like any other fugitive, barefoot, cornered, desperate, and alone.